But it was pulling out some of these beliefs that I didn't realize I was believing.
Yeah.
You know, it all depends on me one, or if I don't, then no one else will. It's like, really? Like, did I really believe that?
Exactly, because when you say it on this side of that equation, when you reveal it and get it into our consciousness, you're like, that's kind of the most arrogant thing in the world.
It's totally arrogant.
And doesn't match what's actually going on around us.
So Kurt, we were talking and we got into this conversation about the word contentment.
Yeah.
And I think it was worthy of an episode here on the Hard But Worth It podcast. So we're giving a whole episode to this idea, the tension, the friction, some of the understanding, and then looking at maybe some of the misunderstanding. So this idea of contentment today, I think generally we might all subscribe to at least a first level definition that says contentment is this idea of being at peace or fully satisfied in the present moment, right? And so we have this view of contentment that we might even use, oh, that person's really content, they're at peace. But what we know as leaders, you know, we're in this space, starting our businesses, leading our organizations, maybe we're leading in our schools and campuses or doing whatever we're doing. We face these moments where we have goals, we have dreams, we have a sense of ambition,
right,
which is this idea of leading to something more. So if we're a leader having ambitions that lead us to more for the future, and yet we say we're content, can we really be content and ambitious? Are those mutually exclusive terms?
Yeah.
And you had an interesting take on this idea of contentment. And what you did is you took contentment, you said, let's put it on a shelf for a moment. Let's use a different word.
Right.
And then you spun up contentment. And I thought it was fascinating. So pull us into that a little bit.
I started to, just a little context, I started to play with this word because I kept running in, well, most of the people we work with, these leaders that we get to work with are really ambitious people. They're charging after all kinds of things. They want to make something happen in the world and they know it hasn't happened yet. And so they're setting up these races and they set goals and there's finish lines in the future and they're trying to run these and it's hard journeys. And a lot of times along the way, they get really tired and they get burned out and they hit the wall and they just, and I start to hear this, I wish I could just rest. I wish I could just be content. I wish I was at peace. That's sort of an idea. I never feel like I'm at peace. And so it was from the very beginning, this has been a subject that I've thought quite a bit about because it's a lived experience for a lot of people. And they frame it as, I just want to be content. A few years ago when it came out, one author, Yuval Noah Harari, wrote a book called Sapiens, and it's a pretty fabulous book. And he had this little section where he was talking about happiness. And he sets up these 3 paragraphs, and each paragraph has a very tight topic sentence. And it kind of is one of the places I've landed on how to address this question. The first thing he says, the first sentence is, humans were not designed to be satisfied, which is a big statement. And you have to kind of go, do I agree with that? What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
That'll move some people's cheese right there.
Yeah, exactly. The human was, but partly because so many of us are so desperate to be satisfied. Right? There's a restaurant down in Napa Valley. I can't remember which one it is now, but it just has, the slogan is the temporary satisfaction of hunger. You know? Satisfaction has a notion of, it's temporary. It doesn't last because, according to this author, the human was not made to be satisfied. We are explorers. And it can be too much, but it's there in us, right? So that's one. The human was not made to be satisfied. The second paragraph starts with this sentence. It says, success. And so success is the satisfaction, accomplishing that which you thought would satisfy you. Success breeds ambition. I was like, well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because that's not what a lot of us think.
Right.
When I'm sitting with people, they don't quite say it this, well, in fact, they don't say it this way, but you can sum it up as them saying, I will be happy if something happens, if I get the win, if I get the sale, if I start my company, if I reach X number of revenue dollars, some metric of I'll be happy if, or it's I'll be happy when.
When.
And I'm like, fascinating, because what they're saying is when I'm successful, I'll be happy. And according to this author, it's like, success breeds ambition, which is what I mostly notice. And then the third sentence is simply this: happiness is when reality matches expectations. If you think about that, that's fascinating because it means that when something happens, when there's a moment when the lived experience and our expectations sync, we become happy. So if I expected to have a beautiful vacation and a wonderful trip to wherever, and it happens, that's pretty awesome.
Right.
I feel happy about that. If I want to buy a new car or a new truck, and like I wanted to buy the new Bronco. I thought that would be a fun vehicle to have. And I looked at them a lot, and I built 3 or 4 of them online. And like Ford knew I was after a Bronco at one point. I didn't end up doing it for a variety of reasons. But if I had, there would have been, that truck was on back order for a long time. And for a year and a half, I would have been waiting for it. And there would have been a moment when I would have had the Bronco. I would have sat in it, driven off the lot, and reality would match expectations. And that moment is happy making. The problem is that's a success, and it breeds ambition.
Right.
And what ambition is the moving of the expectations. My expectation has been met, and so I'm going to move it.
Right.
And open up a new gap, a new thing to go after.
Yeah.
And I think what people are talking about when they talk about satisfaction or contentment in the way that we commonly hear it described, I think what they're talking about is that definition of happy. They're talking about a moment when everything is as it should be.
Yeah. But what you're describing is that's impossible. If what this author's saying is true, then the moment you are content, you're on to the next thing. And so you can't, it's a temporary place.
Satisfaction of our hunger. But
it's interesting.
But the hunger comes back. It's temporary. When I run into people who have goals, and some people are pretty good at this and they actually accomplish them. Goals are accomplishable. It's pretty incredible. They'll just write new goals. It doesn't satisfy us. We acclimate to whatever our new normal is, and then we want to grow again.
Yeah.
And I think there's a goodness in that. And so it feels wrong to call the opposite of ambition contentment. Because what I want to do is figure out how to find that place of, we'll call it settledness or satisfied or whatever that is. We all kinds of words for it. That place that we're all looking for, which I think is a place. But I want to find it in the presence of ambition.
Yeah.
Because I think ambition is pretty awesome and pretty hardwired. But I don't want to sacrifice my... do we use the word happiness along the way? Like, it's
Sure.
I don't want to sacrifice that either. So I reframed contentment in this process of thinking this through. Simply this: to find contentment is to find the middle place between two things. And to be able to have two things be equally true. And we call this a both and. It's not either this or this. I'm not ambitious or content. It's that I can be both simultaneously.
Correct.
When we learn how to do that, I think we can find contentment in increasing amounts of circumstances.
Yeah. I think it's holding that space that we all arrive to for different reasons, different ages, stages, places in our life, but where we can say, I am and I'm not yet.
Exactly.
And both are equally true.
Exactly.
I find people in my life, I'm sure you've coached many, many people and have relationships, but some might peak a little earlier in their years and they maybe come to this conclusion sooner, or midlife is another invitation for this to actually become realized. But it's this idea that my best days aren't behind me. Yeah, I have achieved quite a bit. I have maybe some regrets, but I also have the stirring in me that there is still more. And I begin to hold that space well in a sense of contentment. And I think you're right. I think there's a place of contentment where we say, I'm happy with where I am, but I also know there's more to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we do that well, I think we do some of our best work. I mean, I feel the most centered. Now, then the thing is we live in a world and we have this idea of progress.
Right.
It's pushing us forward more and more, faster and faster. Technology, I mean, think about AI. Stuff is just unfolding so fast that it's kind of counterintuitive, where we feel like we have to get fully off to be content, rather than still be able to hold the tension. Right. So let's just talk a little bit about that.
So the another way to think about either or, it's either this or it's
Right.
this, and we're trying to say no, it's both. They both. Another thing there is all or nothing. It's a different version of the same problem.
Yeah.
And there's this: I've got to be all in. I got to be learning everything, growing, progressing, doing all this stuff, or I have to get out of the rat race.
Right.
I got to get off the grid, disconnect, unplug. But it's not. It doesn't work that way, because people who get out of the rat race in order to find nothing, like, it actually turns out to be a ton of work to live off the grid.
Right.
It's a different rat race.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you hold it differently, then it can be quite beautiful. But if you can hold living off the grid that way, you could also hold living on the grid that way. And then you can be content in either situation, because it's not an all or nothing. I hear a lot of people who are working a lot of hours, very dedicated. They're working hard. Maybe they've been doing it for a long time. And they begin to say things like, I just want to spend more time with my family. I just want to spend more time with my family, which I think is a noble thing to do. And so we're like, okay, how are we going to do that? And they're like, I need to make more money so that I can have enough money that I don't need to work anymore, so I can spend more time with my family. And I'm like, I actually think that you'll spend the rest of your life trying to get there. And by the time, I've literally had people describe plans to get enough money so they don't have to work. Well, it also includes building the house they want to raise their family in, and taking the vacations and doing all the things and all the experiences they want with their kids. It would take them so much time to get that done. Their kids will be gone by the time they do it. And I'm like, you don't have to do it that way. It's the all or nothing thing. Most of us could spend more time with our family today. Most of us could spend enough time with our family today and still be ambitious. That's another example of, can we live in those tensions?
Yeah. And I think we want that as humans. I think we do desire that, but we're fighting systems, ideologies that are out there. You know, I'm thinking right now there's this tendency that goes all the way back to the Greeks, you know, but this dualistic mindset where it's somehow embedded in our society, in the way we as humans kind of maybe see some of the unhelpful sides of our way of doing life, but this idea that I have to pick one or the other. Yeah. You know, one is good, one is bad, rather than going, no, actually, we can integrate.
That's right.
Work isn't bad, and rest isn't only good.
Right.
I mean, there are scenarios where too much rest is actually bad.
Right.
And not enough work is actually bad.
Really bad.
Right? So I think there's how do we do that? Because even like John Comer, who wrote the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he's kind of speaking to some of these tones too, because I think there's different ways surrounding this concept that we can look at it through different lenses. But he brings up this idea of Sabbath and resting. And the whole origin of that is, you know, we know religiously today, people are like, sundown at 5 o'clock till, you know, sun up at 5 a.m. the next day. There's no work. Don't even pick up a pencil. And we know all the rules that go there.
Right.
He goes back to the Jewish origin of this day. And he's like, no, actually, Sabbath wasn't not do anything. It was taking a moment to delight in the thing you were working for, delighting in, recreating with, spending time with your family, being active in. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the way we find a bit of balance there too, is just in the both and.
One of the things that I think is important in this idea, in the current lived experience, not for everybody, but for many of the people that we're engaging with on a regular basis, I'm saying most people who are listening to this podcast, this would be true for, is the nature of work has changed. The way value is created has changed, and it is no longer simple or repetitive processes. It's no longer mindless in a way. It's a full engagement of the self. Is when you're doing aesthetic work or dealing with complex problems or all these things that we do today. It's a different kind of activity, and that activity, I think, requires these rest periods, this Sabbath notion, to be valuable, to actually do valuable work. And all kinds of people I know who are just working harder, focus. They're doing this. It diminishes their ability to create value because they're not taking these spaces and going off and getting off the grid, so to speak. And in that idea, I have found it surprising how, as I've practiced this, that the line between work and play has gotten really blurry.
Right.
I no longer think of work as work and play as play. Sometimes I'm working and I absolutely shouldn't be. I'm beyond value. I'm just sitting at my desk. I'll be like, what'd I do in the last hour? And it's kind of like I was just a good boy who stayed at work.
Sure.
And I need to go actually play to allow my creative space to emerge, to allow myself to recharge, refuel, and play is now a very necessary part of work. And so that blurring of that helped me recognize that I don't have this ambition and then this rest or this like I can be at peace in both now, not all the time, but increasingly. And sometimes I find it difficult to know when I'm playing and when I'm working. Sometimes it's very obvious,
right?
And that's fine. But increasingly, this notion of being at peace regardless of what I'm doing, peace. Here's another side track. You got to go on. This word peace is tricky. Lots of people think peace is the absence of conflict.
Right.
I think that's backwards. I think it's a very unhelpful way to think about peace.
Absolutely.
Peace is actually when you can be in the presence of conflict. War is the absence of it. Right now, the Russians and the Ukrainians are at war because the Russians, best we can tell, are trying to make the Ukrainians not exist. Somehow they decided, I can no longer stand to have you. I can't deal with you anymore, so I'm going to eliminate you. But you can be with an enemy during times of peace and sit at the table with them. And we call that times of peace, where enemies can actually sit and talk and dialogue and converse and coexist. That's what peace looks like.
Yeah.
And so this ability to be at peace, I think a lot of people put that in their mind as though there's nothing, there's zero conflict, no tension at all. And I actually think peace is the presence of tension and an increased capacity to be at peace in tension, right? That kind of a notion. And so we say peace is the presence of conflict, war is its absence, right? Now all I can do is eliminate you or dominate you.
Right.
And so these ideas that we have, they're early stage ideas, I think. We want to upgrade them. And I think it's actually necessary on the order of required. If you're going to be a great leader and if you're going to elevate into more and more complex, difficult situations in which you're leading, to have this capacity on board, to no longer be looking for everything to be without tension in order to find that space, because that space that we're describing is incredibly necessary to do the work of leading.
Right. Well, and I think what we agree on in part of our talking together and why we thought doing an episode was important was we have found in our lives that we do our best work when we hold that tension well.
That's right.
And I think we even begin to talk about leaders in our lives or people in our lives where we've seen them impact us or influence us in ways where they also do their best work when they've held this tension well. I think when we have to pick one or the other, or when we decide to pick one or the other, we're making a decision to downgrade.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can hold the line and find a way to live in a world that is pushing us toward more and more faster and faster, which isn't bad, but how do we hold the tension so that we can say, I'm happy with where I am, and I know I'm not fully where I want to be. I mean, those just feel like coming out of the same side of my mouth. It just feels like they're wrong to say, but inside we're being honest.
Yeah.
And the minute we're honest in that place, I think we start to really get clear on what we really want, and we're going after the types of things that really will bring us the most meaning and ultimate satisfaction that we're looking for.
Yeah. One of my favorite ways I've heard this described is for many of us who are married, when we got married, the day we got married, we would have said that we loved our spouse 100%. Like we're just all in. I just completely filled. And then 15, 20, maybe 30 years later, if you're still married, you might still say, I love my spouse 100%. But those are two different 100%.
Yeah.
Because a lot has happened along the way. And so there's a way in which I was completely in love on the day I married my wife, but not near in love enough to stay married to her, which I have accomplished so far. And that love that has shown up and carried us through the 28 years we've been married wasn't on board on day one. It was enough for day one, and then year one, and then decade one.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's this, I am enough today, but I'm not enough yet for where we're going. So let's grow. That's the ambition. And if you just settle into, I watch marriages at times that just settle into the amount they were able to capture in the first 5 years or in the first 10 years, and then they kind of just plateau. And they can often stay married, but it's like they've lost their ambition for what's possible from a relationship like that. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay. But there's more, right? There's more.
So pull us into a bit of a freebie in a coaching session here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a couple scenarios your way.
All right, cool.
So here's one. So, client A comes into your office and they are just high strung on ambition.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take you long to realize that they don't have any sense of happiness and they're in the either or dichotomy. And they've chosen ambition and it's just more and more, and they're in it.
Yep.
And you know where this is probably leading them to.
Yep.
Let's talk about that client A and what are some things you're going to do with them to begin to see the balance there, the tension, and begin to hold that.
Yep.
How might you drop them into that?
That's awesome. So there's a lot of, every client presents differently in this category. And so you have to customize how you design the actual work you're going to do. But the theme is simply this. That client probably is trying to prove something by doing something. And we call this the do to prove. I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to do something in the world to prove that I am worthy of love and acceptance or that I am enough. And they've probably been on that journey for a while. And it depends on where they are. If they're pre the break point or post the break point, it's a different tools. But that's the basic framework that I approach that from. And often what I'll do, what they're doing is they're operating from the idea of if I can do enough to prove enough, to be enough, to make enough, to succeed enough, I will be okay. Yeah. And they believe that. That's a conclusion they've come to. It's baked into their worldview because it's kind of baked into the American psyche. We say things like bigger is better, as though that's just a fact. It's not a fact for cancer, right? It's not a fact for all kinds of things in the world. But we just more, all that kind of stuff. So what I want to do is raise that belief up into their consciousness and then have them test it, right? And sometimes we'll test it in the direction they're actually going, but if you can raise it up into consciousness and they'll say, this is an amalgamation of ideas, but they'll say, I need to make, $200,000 a year, or I want to make $1 million a year. And I'm like, okay, great. That's doable because it is. Just do the work and you can get that done. And then they go hit that goal and they ask the question, are you enough yet? Now, how do you feel? Did that do it? And it's never a yes. It's like, yeah, no, that didn't do it, right? And if you've brought this belief system up into consciousness and you can help them see that didn't do it, you can get them to potentially suspend their conclusion. It creates a cognitive dissonance, and that opens up a potential for a new thought to come in.
Got it.
They have to experience it, though. You can't just tell them this stuff. Everybody's read this in every book.
Sure.
So you put them in motion to experience it. Or you can actually get them, especially if they've already broken against this rock a bit, you can get them to begin to question that in a dialogue. And then you can go, what if we went the other direction? And they're like, oh, well, the world would fall apart or something like that, right? Everything would break. I'm like, I wonder if that's true.
Right.
Let's design a little experiment. And then we'll go do that. Now, it's a small thing. It's not big, but we'll go do it. And we'll see what happens. And then again, we bring it into consciousness so that they can actually measure what actually happens. And we tell the story properly. Because a lot of times they'll go do this thing, it'll have a good outcome, and they'll just basically go, well, I just got lucky. That's not actually how the world works. And it's like, no, it actually
it's for everyone
is.
else.
Everybody else. I had a guy that I was working with for quite a while, and he had one company, and he was learning how to lead that company differently. And he was trying to build a company that he could actually fully become the owner of and not work in. So everybody says, I want to work on, not in my business. And I'm like, actually, you probably don't. Actually, you probably love working in your business. And if we actually got you to work on it, it'd probably freak you out because you lose control.
Sure.
And that's hard. So this one summer, he decided he was going to go on a very long vacation. He had a new general manager on staff in this position, and he was nervous about that. And I'm like, well, let's run an experiment. You go away, I'll stay with her, and I'll keep working with her, and we'll see what happens. And then no contact for like a month and a half or 2 months. And then when you come back, we'll find out what happened. And so we did. And during those 2 months, this whole team elevated it with him gone.
Wow.
That he came back to a better managed company than when he left,
Sure.
because he was actually stifling it. And he believed he had to be there all the day, mother henning the thing and making sure he was making all the decisions. And when we got him out of there, which is what he said he wanted, but it took this little experiment. Within a few years, he was running a company that was 5 times as large. And he ran that one very differently, and he wasn't even involved in this other one. And then a few years later, we started another company. And then a few years later, we started another one. And he ended up with 6 companies, and he's just owns them. He puts these general managers in position. It's like the whole business model now is he spins something up, he puts someone in it, and then he walks away. He's incredibly good at it now.
All right, so confession time here.
Yeah.
I think I've been client A, and I've learned some of that over the years. You know, of
it's an archetype actually.
Yeah.
Lots of us, myself included, have worked from. It's a need for control.
It is,
and we just don't want to let go.
And there's beliefs underneath that you're believing, like this person you're talking about, this idea that everything would fall apart. So that story might be, it all depends on me,
right?
Which is a thing that we tend to think. Well, it all depends on me, but like when you listen to that,
right?
Really,
and
like does it all?
That's an all or nothing right there.
Does it all depend on you? Like say that.
And then that very same person will also say, I want to work on the business, not in the business.
Yeah, right.
Or they'll say, I want to spend more time with my family, or
totally,
I want passive income. And I'm like, you don't. What you want to do is control your little business.
Yeah, I came to the revelation not long ago with my wife and family that I actually enjoy working. And that's a good thing.
Right.
So if I have time off and it's my discretionary time, I will sometimes use that to work. But I find value in that because I feel like I'm creating, I'm building, I get some of my best thoughts going in that space. So here, client B. Now we're talking about client B. So client A is
the do to prove thing, right?
The do to prove.
Yeah.
So client B is the other. They've subscribed to the either or, but they are the I have to find my way out of the cycle. I've got to rest. I need this work-life balance, and it's got to be totally perfect. It's this thing that too much work is bad, and I need to find my way into this lane. And they're really believing this sense that my quality of life is really determined by the level of rest, if you will, or peace, or off the clock time, if you will, whatever we want to call that. So you're dealing with that person who shows up, and that's the story, that's the narrative. How do you coach them?
Yeah, fabulous. So to start with, like we said a minute ago, the first one is an archetype, and what I mean by archetype, it's a personality style. This high ambition, high drive tends to fall into that bucket, that problem. And there's all different kinds of personalities that will do that. This one you're describing is also a personality type. There are people who actually are more, we'll call it driven, and there are people who rest more. They do create these calmer, peaceful places. They bring harmony and often beauty to our world. And you can't compare these two, right? But when both of them will say go bad, right, or behave immaturely or overuse this capacity, it turns into these different things. So the do to prove is one. This one is they just want a nap. And they need a nap, but a nap turns into a nap every day, which turns into this other thing and lack of productivity and all. And they get increasingly bored, and they just sort of wind down into this malaise, right? And what you'll see in that person is they'll then snap into high production, right? And they'll flip with all this energy, and they'll flip into high production, and then that wears them out, and then they fall back. And we call this the try harder, give up cycle. I'm just going to try harder. I've just got to try harder, but it exhausts them, and it doesn't refuel them. And I just need a vacation.
Sure.
And they flip back over here. But that leads to a boredom. And boredom is actually one of the worst things you can do to a human. And it can become isolating, and it can be a withdrawal into a thing that might even produce loneliness. And I want us to think about loneliness for a minute, right? The idea of being alone and loneliness are very different. But loneliness is so torturous to the human that when we take our worst criminals and put them in our worst jails and then they misbehave, how do we punish them? Solitary confinement. And they go crazy sometimes in there. It diminishes them. There's people who've been in long-term solitary confinement and their vocabulary is shrinking. They're literally disappearing. Loneliness is a terrible place to be. So you want to get out of there and you flip back into try harder. So you get this loop going.
Right.
And it's between these two opposites. And you can watch this behavior happen over and over and over again. And I would say what they're really after is trying to elevate. That might be the word we use, or grow.
Yeah.
And to grow, you've got to do both simultaneously. That person is unlikely to pursue coaching. Not as likely to pursue coaching, because coaching is the pursuit of optimization of the human experience, or it's a performance enhancement tool. And they're not looking for a push. They're not looking for someone to say, hey, let's get in the gym and work out today, right? But nonetheless, we find ourselves in that position. And what you want to do is let them get bored enough to, and then you've got to do the same thing. If you have to break that mindset, that idea, they've come to a conclusion that if I could just get a vacation, if I could just get away, if I could just rest enough, I would be happy, content, fulfilled enough to go take on the world. And it's like, that's not actually what happens. Life is best lived in the tension between boredom and anxiety. Too much boredom is terrible. We hate that. No matter how calm you think you want to be, too much of that is terrible for us. And obviously too much anxiety is pretty rough too. But there's this place in between where all the activity is, where all the fun is, where, well, fun's an interesting word. It's where the adventure is. There's a big difference between adventure and entertainment. And a lot of this pursuit that you're describing, client B, is looking to be entertained, you might say, looking for the world to take care of them and support them. And what we want is an adventure. And they have to learn that meaning and purpose in life is probably what they're after. They're not after rest and quiet and calm and this state of nothingness.
Right.
They're after meaning. And what they're doing when they flip out into the try harder thing is they're not finding meaning there either. And they've mistaken that for a lack of meaning, and they believe this will produce it. But what it's really found is in the middle, and that's where the adventure is. That's where the hard things are that are worth it. And when they get that cooking, yeah, they just love naps. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
They love calm, but they find work worth doing and they begin to lean into it in a particular way. And it is highly productive.
Yeah.
It looks different than a type A driven, it looks different, but they start to create, what they really start to do is serve others. And so you have to design the same thing. You've got to recognize the pattern, design experiments for them to start to discover this other thing that they're not finding. It's a cognitive dissonance. And you've got to walk them into that in a way where, and then when they have that moment, you grab it and you celebrate it and you tell a different story about it.
Yeah. So then the work really becomes the work of asking those questions and living in the tension, finding, the way that you do that as an individual, because it really is in the eye of the beholder at this point.
Yeah.
How you perceive contentment and or ambition. If it's an either or, then to you that shows up in your life, lived in a different expression than to the person who sees it as a both and.
Right.
And what we're saying is when we hold that as a both and, we do some of our best work as leaders.
That's key right there. What's been your experience with that idea right there?
Yeah, well, I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I fully learned that until, crashing into my 40s and literally having a crash. For me, it was this hard stop moment where I realized, looking back, I wasn't sure if I understood what it all meant. I was doing a lot of work, but where was this headed? And I think I'd lost my way. I had some big transitions happening in my life that I think opened the windows or the doors to begin to really consider some of the things we're talking about here. You know, I had my first son who was launched out into adulthood and then was married. I was seeing my others starting to grow. So it was like, holy moly, have I done enough? What does this all mean? You know, and for me, it really dropped me into taking a moment to disconnect. So I needed to break away and get off the treadmill I was running on because I was in that mindset that this was the only way. Work harder, and I could work hard. I can put in the time. I had the results to show for it. So to me, it was like, no excuse. If you work hard enough, you can get it done.
Yep.
But in that, it was all on my shoulders. And I was living under the weight that no one put on me.
Right.
I'd pick those bags up happily along the way, somewhere, probably going all the way back to childhood. Thank God, you know, my therapist helped me understand some of those things. But it was pulling out some of these beliefs that I didn't realize I was believing. You know, it all depends on me one, or if I don't, then no one else will. It's like, really? Like, did I really believe that?
Exactly, because when you say it on this side of that equation, when you reveal it and get it into our consciousness, you're like, that's kind of the most arrogant thing in the world.
It's totally arrogant.
And doesn't match what's actually going on around us.
And it just leads to you solving problems that aren't yours to solve. So, of course, it leads to anxiety, burnout, depression, wherever it leads, you know, and some of us take the warning signs sooner. I wasn't that smart. I think my IQ level on those things is pretty low because I was blowing through all the warning signs. But thank God, you know, the crash, the pain of that led me to understand there was a better way.
Right.
And so now that shows up in just my rhythms. I need to have a place where I'm alone to think about these very questions. What matters most to me? And I can value stack. I can place the things that I'm going to give my time to. What am I saying yes to on top? And then I can let the other things fall away, but I know I'm doing that intentionally. I'm not doing it by the way of the world. I'm not somehow fatalistic. It's not happening to me. No, I'm actually showing up.
Right.
I'm happening to this. This is my day. When I open the door and I look out to the world and I greet it, I can have a sense of ambition that there is more for me, but I'm also centered in the place that I'm enough today with where I'm at. And it really does give you a superpower.
Right.
I think I show up into moments more confident, more competent, more clear, more concise. I'm more productive because I'm just super clear in that moment. And people want that. People are attracted to that. I'm attracted to that.
It's necessary. And we recognize in our leaders the difference between people who can do that well and those who are growing in it and those who can't.
Right.
We often don't know how to talk about it, but we recognize it. And it's a feeling. We talk about safe places. Like a great leader can create that sense of covering, we'll call it, or that sense of opening up space for others, or some people refer to it as empowerment, or we have all kinds of words for it. But they open this space up and we can feel it. And what it does for us is it allows us to go do dangerous things. That's what it's for.
That's really good.
It does not keep us safe.
It
removes corruption and toxins, but it allows us to go do something dangerous. And we want that because that's our ambition at work. And we are absolutely gravitate towards leaders like that. And we don't always know when you get started, right? But you get into things and you're like, you're stifling me.
Right.
And I would say that if your leader is stifling you, you got to wonder, why are you there? Why are you staying there? Why are you allowing that leader to stifle you, right? Well, because I need the paycheck. Fucking unemployment is 3.7% right now. There's jobs everywhere, and people are still like, I just need a paycheck.
And some of it is that we just have to know that we're evolving and moving forward. And there's lessons that I'll learn tomorrow that I haven't learned today.
That's precisely right.
And I'm learning lessons today that I didn't learn yesterday. And there's something about the timing, all of that. And some of it is how I show up into that space when I'm ready to actually hear it, because it's maybe been wanting to teach me this like 5 years ago. But the fact is when we step into those moments, we learn and then we grow. And maybe the thing that fit us yesterday we're starting to go, you know what, it's not fitting me anymore. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just different. And because I have ambition, I know where I want to go. It's time for me to change my environment. And I think too, sometimes in our leadership, we can get small in those moments and try to point the finger, if we're not being honest, that it's somehow everyone else's fault. And this is happening to me, rather than going, no, I'm empowered here.
Creating the environment.
I can change my pot.
Yep.
Plant myself in a new environment where I can maybe grow, thrive, flourish in new ways. And so we take that on, and then we do that. And then we get the delight of seeing all these new things happening in our life that we wouldn't have had we stayed where we were.
One of the things in this conversation I'm trying to redeem or bring value back to is the notion of striving. I've heard it so many times that, oh, you're striving. Oh, you're striving.
Yeah.
And there's probably a negative use of that word that is fine. And I would say you're trying to prove, you're proving. But there is this striving for more. The human was not made to be satisfied. It's very natural to strive, to go after more. And I would say the less stifled you become, the more yourself you become, the more you will be reaching, clawing, expanding, growing, that kind of a notion. It seems like it's one of the core attributes of being human.
Yeah.
And we're working with so many high capacity, driven people. And it's as if they're being told, don't do that.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, please.
Yeah. Why do you want more, Kirk?
Yeah, because
No, but why? There's so many people. I mean, why do you want more? Like, it's just a bad thing. Why can't you just be happy?
Because the mountain exists and it must be climbed.
That's right.
Because me bored is dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if I actually just sat around all day, you wouldn't like me. Mm-hmm. Because your definition of contentment is the opposite of striving? No. I want to redeem that part of the equation. And the way to do it is not to teach those people how to not strive, is to teach them how to strive. Right? All things, if connected to God, are good. All things can be made good. All things can be made whole. Every tradition can teach us this.
Yeah.
But if disconnected from the goodness of the world, they're all evil. They're all bad. So how do we take this idea of ambition and strive? It's built into our American culture, right? Bigger is better. Okay. But that's just a profound half-truth. And I had a professor in grad school who would say, the problem with a profound half-truth is the other half. And the goal is not to move from this profound half-truth to this one. It's to have them both on board.
Sure.
And I think contentment is the way to redeem ambition and striving, to hold it differently. Mm-hmm. Nothing to prove, but so much to learn.
Yeah.